You ever sit in an office that feels too polished, like the walls are rehearsing a lie? That was our advisory firm. All glass and brushed steel, humming air vents, monitors glowing, with more tickers than anyone could care to follow. People called it sleek. To me, it felt like a stage set, the kind where you keep waiting for the curtain to drop and reveal the mess behind. I'm David Walker. My job, officially, is portfolio management. My job, unofficially, is keeping families out of the ditch and making sure Thanksgiving dinners don't turn into interrogations about missing wealth. Our book skewed toward long-term, generational clients. The kind where if you screw up, their grandkids will remember your name the way other families remember hurricanes. Adrian Cole sat 2 desks down from me, neat hair, rolled-up sleeves, the kind of smirk that felt borrowed from Milan runways. Clients loved him instantly. He had that voice, low, calm, with just enough certainty to make you believe even when you didn't quite get the math. We weren't just colleagues, we were office friends. The kind who trade playlists at midnight, split takeout when models break, cover for each other when flights run late. At least, that's what I thought. The Whitmore account was mine. Old Connecticut family, quiet money, disciplined mandate. Clara Whitmore handled the calls, direct, surgical, not unkind but never chatty. Our job was simple: keep variance low, follow the model, don't get cute. And for years it worked. Boring was the brand. Then came the drift. Nothing dramatic, just a slow sag in quarterly variance. Like a shopping cart with one bad wheel. You can still push it, but it keeps veering right. The notes said everything was within mandate. The numbers disagreed. And the odd thing? The blips appeared when Adrian was covering for me on travel weeks. Microstructure, Adrian said when I pointed out the slippage. Crossing spreads. It happens. He said it with the easy shrug of a guy returning a rental car late. Annoying but explainable. Maybe he was right. Maybe. But the timing nagged at me. Orders routed differently than our book usually did. Little tells. And then Clara called me out of nowhere. Rumor says you stepped outside mandate in March, she said. No small talk. No soft landing. Just that. My stomach dropped so fast it left a dent in the chair. I pulled the records, combed March line by line. I found nothing outside the rules. But rumors don't wait for truth, so I promised her a memo by Monday, neat and airtight. I'm obsessive about logs, grocery lists, expense reports, travel receipts. I keep versions. It's not paranoia, it's insurance. So I went spelunking in our trade tickets, chat logs, server stamps. And that's where I found it. 2 March notes, signed under my name, phrased in a voice that wasn't mine. Carrie looks sweet. Trim on volume. Those weren't my words, but they were Adrian's. I didn't storm his desk. I didn't call him out. I set bait, asked him to help reconcile Archer's March trades. You're closer to routing than me. He smiled, tapped his trackpad, and within an hour sent back a neat spreadsheet. The same suspicious notes were in there, plus one more. And in that third note, a double space after a period. I used to type that way, back in college. Stopped in 2019, Adrian still did it. That night I stayed late. The office after 9 feels like an abandoned airport. Lights hum, monitors glow, but the air goes hollow. I mirrored the client folder and found an archive directory. Draft letters half finished, metadata pointing to Adrian's machine but tagged with my username. That's not a glitch, that's staging. That's someone writing my name on a check at a restaurant I never entered. I didn't sleep. Saturday morning I took a train to Stamford to see Clara face to face. No laptops, just a binder. We walked March line by line, trade by trade. She watched me the way surgeons watch scans, waiting for shadows. At the end she said, "I believe you," but her voice carried the weight of someone who wished she didn't have to say it. Belief isn't enough. Bring me more. So I went back to the city and built a map. Trades, logs, timestamps, IP routes. Patterns tell stories when you pin them down long enough. And every line, every arrow, curved back to Adrian. Monday morning, I filed the memo. Dry facts, no spin. Compliance hates adjectives. They want numbers, timestamps, screenshots. I gave them that, and nothing more. The note went into their pipeline under preliminary review. That phrase sounds harmless, but inside the firm it means nobody breathe until we decide who's guilty. Adrian found me in the kitchen later, coffee steaming, tie loosened like it was a Friday. He clapped my shoulder. "You did good," he said. I forced a smile, but his eyes gave him away. He didn't mean I did good, he meant I played along. 2 days later came the slip. A small client called my voicemail. "Thanks for the Friday update, David. Appreciate you trimming the position. Only problem, I hadn't called anyone Friday." The system log said the call came from my extension. I pulled the recording. The voice was Adrian's, pitched lower. Almost perfect. Almost. He copied my cadence, even the way I say "look" before I break something down. But he bit the L too hard, like chewing ice. That was the moment I stopped wondering. I knew. He was staging me for a fall, one small piece at a time, hoping the picture would show me as careless while he stayed clean. I didn't confront him. Confrontation's theater, and theater rarely wins. I set the table. First step was forcing a test in front of witnesses. I booked a portfolio hygiene session with Clara Whitmore and her cousins for Friday morning. Invited compliance for transparency. Sent Adrian the invite too, because what's theater without an audience? He replied with a thumbs up emoji and, "Want me there?" I typed, "Of course." Thursday night, I left my badge at home, checked in through security with a temp pass. That created a record manual entry, time-stamped. Meanwhile, Priya from IT set up a silent monitor on any login from my account. She owed me one, and I cashed it in. At 8:37 p.m., I logged in from a ghost virtual machine, tweaked an Archer note, and routed a client acknowledgement to an archive. Priya pinged me. "That you?" I sent her a single period. She knew what that meant. The VM carried a font pack Adrian begged for last year because he hated the way Arial drew the number 2. Petty preferences make perfect fingerprints. Friday morning, the Whitmore townhouse smelled of polished wood and eucalyptus. Clara sat at the head, cousins flanking her, their counsel silent. Jenna from compliance opened her notebook, neutral face. Adrian slid in beside me, pen uncapped, posture relaxed. I started boring. Sector drift, cash levels, variance checks. Then I placed a folder on the table. "These execution notes carry my signature," I said. "2 of them aren't mine." Adrian tilted his head like a museum guest staring at a painting he already disliked. "That's a serious claim," he said. "Serious enough," Jenna replied. "Let's verify," I said, and nodded to Clara. "Would you call the number labeled David Work that rang you Friday?" She dialed, put it on speaker. My phone sat face down, silent. In Adrian's jacket, something buzzed. He killed the vibration with one hand and kept smiling. "Telemarketers spoof numbers all the time," he said. "Then humor me," I said. "Play the recording." Clara tapped her screen. The room filled with Adrian's voice trying to wear my rhythm, biting the L in, "Look." Jenna's pen stopped moving. I slid across the login report, the ghost VM, timestamp 8:37 p.m., building log showing my badge absent. Priya joined on video and showed font metadata. Adrian's custom numeric pack burned into the rogue machine. People claim characters invisible. It isn't. It's in your kerning. Clara didn't raise her voice. She folded her hands. "Why?" she asked. Adrian didn't answer. He just stared, like the oxygen had thinned. The meeting ended in quiet notes. Jenna's line was simple. Preliminary findings show abuse of credentials, not deviation by David. Archer will receive a remedial plan. Clara nodded once. Translation: "We're not pulling assets today." In the elevator, Adrian said, almost admiring, "You built a little theater." I looked straight ahead. No, I built a room where the truth could resonate. HR suspended Adrian's access by afternoon. No dramatic escort. No cardboard box walk. Just a quiet freeze in the system, and his chair left empty. I stared at it for 10 minutes. Empty chairs aren't neutral. They hum with memory. Winter runs in Prospect Park. Lisbon pastries. The time he dragged me out for dumplings after my sister's breakup. That's what betrayal does. It weaponizes your own history. The firm started whispering. Analysts swapped theories in the kitchen. Some thought Adrian was set up. Others thought I'd gone soft. Gossip fills silence like water in a crack. I shut it down where I could. Talk about process, not people. Most listened. Some didn't. Compliance worked the file like surgeons. Screenshots, logs, badge scans. No drama, just slow scalpel cuts. Jenna stopped by my desk one evening. "We'll finish the review soon," she said. "You'll come out fine." Her tone said, "But your friend won't." Adrian emailed me from a personal address a week later. Short sentences, careful words. He didn't deny anything. He asked for one thing: a chance to explain. To me, not to save his job, just to say it out loud. I agreed to meet. We picked a diner on 9th, the kind that tastes like 1998, coffee burnt but strong. He was there early, collar open, no swagger. "I thought I could steer flow," he said. "Not steal, just bias it. Make you look messy, me look tidy. Assets follow tidy." He rubbed his temple. My brother's startup imploded. I felt like I had to cover both of us. I told myself nobody would notice because nothing exploded. "People always notice," I said. "They just notice late." He nodded. "I deserve what's coming." He looked at me, waiting for the hammer. "But I want one chance, to do something right with the mess I made." That's when I told him my idea. Not revenge. A lesson. A deck. I told Adrian what I wanted over that chipped Formica table. No yelling, no gavel, just a plan. "You're gonna build a deck," I said. "Line by line, trade by trade. You'll explain every trick you used, every shortcut you thought nobody would catch, every log that burned you in the end. Screenshots, timestamps, even the bad grammar. Don't make it pretty, make it true." He blinked like I'd just spoken another language. "That's the punishment?" "It's the lesson," I said. "You'll present it to the new analysts. They'll learn faster from your mistakes than they ever will from my lectures. If you do it clean, I'll confirm you delivered it. Not a reference, not a save, just a fact." He sat back, rubbing his jaw. "That's worse than firing." "Maybe, but it sticks." Back at the firm, gossip swirled. Someone in ops asked me flat out, "Why didn't you bury him?" I shrugged. Fire burns out. Lessons echo. She didn't quite get it, but she stopped asking. Adrian sent the first draft 2 nights later. It was clumsy, defensive, like he was still editing for Pride. I kicked it back. "No spin, strip it down." The second version was better. He titled it, "Soft Hands, Hard Lines." The opening slide said, in big letters, "You won't get caught until the day you do." When Priya and I piloted the deck with 2 first years, they leaned forward like kids at a campfire. Adrian stood at the front, posture stiff, voice low. He admitted the rationalizations, the late-night edits, the fake calls. One analyst asked, "Why risk it?" Adrian didn't dodge. "I confused being needed with being untouchable," he said. Silence stretched in the room. That answer landed harder than any policy doc we'd ever written. Clara Whitmore called me the next week. "We heard Adrian's been teaching," she said. Not suspicious, more curious. I told her the truth. He was laying out the anatomy of his own failure for our rookies. She paused, then asked, "Would he do the same for us? Our family office team needs to know what slipped through." So we set it up. Thursday morning, Clara and 2 staffers came downtown. Adrian walked them through the deck without flinching. Showed the doctored notes, the spoofed call logs, even the font-pack fingerprint. He didn't name himself. He didn't need to. Clara took notes like she was auditing a factory line. At the end, she closed her pad and said, "Thank you. That answers questions I didn't want to ask." On the way out, she turned to me. "Keep the fences dull," she said. That was her way of saying, structure beats drama, always. That night, I emailed Adrian one line. "Deck worked." He replied, "Thanks for not killing me in public." I didn't answer. Some messages don't need echoes. The firm rolled Adrian's deck into onboarding. New analysts had to sit through it before they touched a trade. We recorded his narration and archived it in the training library. The cover slide carried no names, just the title and the date. But everyone knew. Meanwhile, compliance hardened the guardrails. Dual approval on client-specific trades, weekly route audits. Priya coded a tiny tool that flagged suspicious notes, extra spaces, weird phrasing. It caught 3 harmless typos in the first week, but the analysts grinned like kids spotting traffic cameras. Nobody wanted to be the next case study. I ran quarterly review with Clara not long after. She zeroed in on execution costs, asked pointed questions, then nodded when the deltas came back clean. "That's dull," she said. I smiled. "Exactly." Later, one of her cousins pulled me aside. "You could have torched him," he said, meaning Adrian. "Why didn't you?" I told him truth beats spectacle in the long run. "Drama's loud early, quiet late. Truth flips that," he grinned. "You sound like my grandfather," I said. Then he's a smart man. Adrian never came back to the firm. HR kept his termination file sealed, but everyone knew the gist. His desk stayed empty for a month before facilities carted away the chair. Strange how the absence of a person has weight. Colleagues still lowered their voices near that corner, like he might return if they spoke too loud. I bumped into him once outside a bookstore on the Upper West Side. He looked thinner, hair longer, no tie. He gave a half smile and asked if the deck was still in circulation. "Every onboarding class," I said. He nodded, almost proud. "Good, let him see where shortcuts land." Then he tapped the book in his hand, something on behavioral finance, and walked off before I could ask more. Inside the firm, the effect of his fall lingered. Analysts now double-checked logs before sending reports. Priya's audit tool became as routine as the morning coffee pot. Clara sent a thank you note after our second clean quarter, handwritten in neat cursive. "Boring is the new bold," she wrote. I pinned it inside my drawer. One Friday, over drinks, club soda for me, sparkling water for them, 2 associates asked if I missed Adrian. I told them the truth. Yes and no. Friendship and betrayal don't cancel each other. They stack, like 2 columns on the same ledger. Both stay visible. The Whitmore review cycle shifted after the scandal. Clara wanted more FaceTime, fewer emails, so I made quarterly trips to Stamford with nothing but binders and scratch paper. No laptops, no slides, just ink and patience. It felt old school, but she liked the ritual. It told her we weren't hiding behind macros or templates. One afternoon, after a long session, she asked me something personal. "Do you trust yourself more now or less?" I paused. I'd been expecting questions about spreads, not about me. "More," I said finally. "Because I saw where I could have broken, and I didn't. That counts." She studied me for a beat, then said, "That's the only answer I wanted." Back in the city, a recruiter called, smooth voice, dangling numbers. "After the March mess, you must be looking around," he said. I laughed, not kindly. "That's exactly why I'm not." He didn't push, he knew. Firms crave stability more than they crave flash. Meanwhile, Adrian kept sending me short notes, sometimes a link to a risk article, sometimes just a one-liner, "Don't let boredom dull your edge." I never replied, but I read them all. Ghosts don't vanish, they shift jobs. The deck gained a reputation outside our walls. An analyst who left for a London bank told me he'd seen slides that looked suspiciously familiar. "Soft hands, hard lines," he said. Somebody photocopied it. I didn't mind. Lessons spread the way gossip does, through whispers and screenshots. If it saved one rookie from trying a cute trick, it was worth it. Clara's cousins remained skeptical longer than she did. They pressed me in every review, hunting for cracks. I answered straight, no performance. Slowly their tones softened. At one meeting, one cousin leaned back and said, "You know, we expected you to be defensive forever. You're not." I shrugged. Defensiveness eats time. "I'd rather use that on trades." He grinned. "Fair." By winter, the firm's culture felt subtly different. Less swagger, more diligence. Not because of new rules, but because everyone had a live parable in their heads. Adrian had become both villain and teacher, which is a weird legacy but an effective one. And me? I just kept doing the work, line by line, trade by trade, one dull fence at a time. By the next spring, I'd settled into a rhythm that felt almost too quiet. No late-night crisis calls, no panicked rumors, no shadow logs. Just steady trades, audits clean, clients calm. In our world, calm is rare. But calm also makes you paranoid, like waiting for a shoe that never drops. Clara noticed. After one review, she said, "You seem restless." I laughed. "You ever hear about pilots who get anxious when the turbulence stops?" "That's me," she nodded. "Then learn to fly straight. We like boring skies." Inside the firm, promotions trickled down. My name came up for senior portfolio lead. The head of risk pulled me aside. "Your file's spotless, David." But spotless comes with a story now. Clients know. Are you comfortable being the guy who lived through the mess? I didn't hesitate. Better than being the guy who caused it. That seemed to settle him. I still thought about Adrian. Once in a while, I'd see his name pop up on a blog comment or a small open source commit. He was out there, building something quieter. I hoped he kept building. Because here's the truth. Betrayal isn't just about the fall. It's about what you choose to do after the landing. The analysts who'd seen Adrian's deck started repeating one line, "Don't be cute." It became shorthand in the office. Someone would suggest a weird route or a clever timing tweak, and another would mutter, "Don't be cute." It broke the tension and saved time. Culture is built on little phrases like that, not mission statements. One late night, Priya stopped by my desk. "Do you ever regret not pushing for legal action?" she asked. I thought for a second. No. I wanted him to feel the weight, not the headline. Headlines fade. Lessons don't. She gave a small smile. That's brutal in its own way. Months later, Clara invited me to a Whitmore family gathering. Not a review. Just dinner. That surprised me. I showed up in a suit that felt too stiff for the occasion, but they didn't mind. Over dessert, Clara's cousin raised a glass. "To fences," he said. Everyone chuckled, but I caught the undertone. They weren't toasting returns. They were toasting trust. Walking back to the train, I realized I hadn't thought about the March scandal all night. It had finally shifted from present tense to past. That was the real win. Career momentum followed. Recruiters called again, this time with better offers. One pitched London, another Zurich. I turned them down. The firm had seen me through a storm, and Clara's family had stuck when they could have bolted. Loyalty cuts both ways. Still, quiet nights left space for questions. Did I handle Adrian right? Was forcing him to teach the harsher punishment, or the fairer one? Some days I wondered if I'd been selfish, making his failure into my firm's parable. Other days I figured it saved a dozen careers. Truth is, it was both. Justice is messy like that. I ran into one of the new analysts on the subway. She spotted me, grinned, and said, "Your friend's deck scared me straight." I asked if she meant Adrian. She nodded. "I'll never fake a log after hearing that story." Then she added, almost shy, "Thanks for not hiding it." I smiled, but inside I thought, maybe that was the point all along. Personal life doesn't stay walled off from the office, no matter how hard you try. Friends asked why I'd been quieter, why I skipped the weekend basketball games or left dinners early. I didn't have a neat answer. It wasn't exhaustion. It was the way betrayal shifts your sense of gravity. You start weighing trust in grams instead of pounds. My sister noticed first. She said, "You're listening to people like you're auditing them." I almost denied it, then stopped. She was right. Every pause in a story felt loaded. Every missed call suspicious. Adrian's ghost had taught me to scan for cracks everywhere. That kind of vigilance helps in markets. It corrodes at home. I forced myself to loosen. Dinner with friends. No phone on the table. Pick up basketball. No checking alerts between games. Small habits, but habits rebuild normal. Clara surprised me again. At a review, she asked, "Do you still trust anyone fully?" I stalled, then said, "Fewer people. But maybe I trust the right ones more." She gave the faintest smile. That's growth. Painful, but growth. That night I walked home slower than usual, thinking maybe survival wasn't just about catching liars. Maybe it was about not letting them rewrite how you live. The firm leaned into its new culture. Training sessions opened with a 10-minute talk called Hard Lessons. Different seniors rotated through, but the story always came back to Adrian's deck. It wasn't about shaming him. It was about reminding everyone that mistakes don't disappear just because you tuck them in the margins. I took on mentoring duties for 2 new hires. Both had sharp math, shaky instincts. First week, one tried to slip a small variance under temporary adjustment. I stopped him. "Write the reason in plain English," I said. He hesitated, then scribbled. Didn't want to admit I misread the order. Honest, clumsy, but real. That's what I wanted. Outside, life felt steadier. I went to more family dinners, started running again without headphones, just letting the city noise fill in. One Sunday, while jogging past the river, I caught myself thinking about Adrian, not with anger, not with nostalgia, just with a kind of detached curiosity. He was part of my story, sure, but he wasn't the center anymore. That realization landed like oxygen. Clara invited me back to the Whitmore townhouse for another review. This time it felt different. No suspicion in the air, just business. We went line by line through allocations, her cousins throwing sharper questions than ever. I answered steady, never defensive. At the end, Clara closed her binder and said, "This feels sustainable." That was the biggest compliment she could give. Walking back to Grand Central, I thought about how close I'd come to losing it all. A few forged notes, a spoofed call, and suddenly my career, my reputation, everything could have tilted. If I hadn't kept logs, hadn't trusted my instinct, maybe I'd be the one out there trying to piece together a second act. At the station, I saw a young analyst from another firm, flipping through a thick manual. He looked lost. For a second I wanted to tell him, keep everything. Every note, every log, every receipt. Someday it'll save you. I didn't. Some lessons you only learn when the floor shakes. Summer brought turbulence, not from people this time but from markets. Inflation numbers spiked, tech sagged, and every client wanted reassurance at once. Phones lit up like pinball machines. Old instincts screamed at me to get clever, to shave here, trim there, outsmart the storm. But clever had nearly sunk me once already. Instead, I leaned on the new rhythm, dual approvals, plain English notes, steady rebalancing. It felt like driving a car with the cruise control locked, while the highway bucked and twisted. But it worked. Losses stayed within guardrails. Clara's cousins still pushed, but their tone carried respect, not suspicion. Feels like we're rowing straight while others are zigzagging, one said. At night, though, doubt still whispered. Was I being too rigid? Would boredom turn into blind spots? I'd jog the river path, city lights reflecting off the water, and argue with myself. Somewhere around mile 3, I'd remember Adrian's fake notes. That was enough to snap me back. Cute shortcuts look harmless, until they aren't. By August, the Whitmores had weathered the storm better than peers. Clara sent me a short email. Thank you for staying boring. I pinned it to my wall. The firm's partners noticed. Stability sells. Suddenly, I was the guy they wheeled out for cautious prospects, the we don't gamble face of the book. I didn't love the spotlight, but I understood it. Trust isn't built with fireworks. It's built with repetition. One lunch, the managing partner asked if I'd consider running a training series for seniors. Not numbers, he said. Culture, how to not screw up what we've built. I laughed. You want me to teach dullness? He raised his glass. Exactly. I used Adrian's deck as the backbone, stripped of names, padded with case studies from other firms. Each session started with the same slide. Discipline is invisible until it isn't. People rolled their eyes at first, but by the third session they were quoting it back to me. That's how culture cements. Meanwhile, Adrian's ghost popped up again, this time in a risk management journal. An article, unsigned but clearly his voice, about the ethics of invisible mistakes. I read it twice. He'd turned his fall into a thesis. Strange feeling. Half pride, half ache. Outside the firm, life picked up. I rejoined the weekend basketball group, bruised my ankle, laughed harder than I had in months. I even let a friend set me up on a date, the first in a long time. Over dinner she asked what I did. I said, I keep rich families from panicking. She laughed and said, sounds like babysitting. I grinned. Sometimes it is. But trust had rewired me. I paid more attention, not just at work but everywhere. If someone canceled last minute, I noticed patterns. If a story shifted detail, I clocked it. It wasn't paranoia exactly, more like a scar. You rub it when the weather changes. Still, I was lighter than before. Betrayal hadn't ruined me. It had sanded me down, sharpened some edges, dulled others. I wasn't naive anymore, but I wasn't bitter either. One night I scrolled back through old messages from Adrian, the playlists, the dumb jokes, the rants about landlords. I didn't delete them. Memory doesn't vanish on command. It sits there, balanced against what came after, and maybe that's fine. Every system gets tested. Sometimes by markets, sometimes by people. Ours got tested by a new hire named Julian. Fresh grad, smart, too confident. First month on the desk, he tried to optimize a client trade by routing through a side venue we'd blacklisted years ago. Tiny variance, nothing catastrophic, but it broke 2 of our new rules at once. I caught it in the audit, called him into a conference room. He came in swinging. It saved basis points. Isn't that the job? I let him finish, then slid the log across the table. Read the reason line you wrote. He squinted. It said, because I thought I could get away with it. His face flushed. I was joking. Logs don't joke, I said. I pulled up Adrian's deck on the screen. Julian groaned. Not this again. I leaned back. Yes, this again. You don't have to like it, but you have to learn it. Every clever trick feels harmless, until it doesn't. Then you'll be the case study everyone whispers about. He muttered an apology. I told him straight. One more. You're out. Not because of money lost. but because trust lost doesn't grow back. He nodded, quieter now. Lesson landed. The incident reminded me how fragile culture is. One person can tilt it, but one parable can steady it too. After Julian's slip, the whole desk started quoting the same line again. Don't be cute. It became our shorthand. We'd laugh, but we'd also stop pushing where rules drew the fence. Clara heard about Julian. Rumors move fast. She asked me directly in a call. I told her the truth. He made a mistake. We caught it. He owned it. She didn't scold. She just said, "That's why we stay with you." 6 words, but they carried more weight than any quarterly report. At home, I felt the tension loosening. Nights weren't filled with second-guessing anymore. I'd cook, read, run along the river. Simple rhythms. Betrayal had left its mark, sure, but it hadn't defined me. It had taught me fences, not fear. One evening, scrolling headlines, I saw Adrian's name on a panel for an ethics and finance conference. I stared at it a long time. Maybe he was carving his own redemption arc. Maybe that was his way of paying back. Either way, the story had traveled farther than either of us expected. By fall, the firm shifted me into a bigger role, senior lead across multiple books. It came with longer hours, more pressure, but also a different kind of authority. I wasn't just running trades. I was shaping how others thought about risk. And risk, I'd learned, isn't numbers first, it's culture first. I gave a talk to the whole floor. Markets punish arrogance, so do clients, and the only thing faster than a rumor is regret. Write logs, follow fences, stay boring. Some smirked, some nodded. I didn't care. Words seed slowly. That night, Clara emailed me again. I hear culture changed. That's the only alpha that matters. Short, sharp, unmistakable. I sat back and realized she was right. Numbers shift, markets tilt, but culture compounds. I closed my laptop and let myself breathe. For the first time in months, I wasn't bracing for the floor to move. I trusted it, at least for now. Life has a way of checking whether your work lessons bleed into everything else. Mine came at a family dinner. My brother-in-law pitched me on a can't-miss real estate deal. Flashy brochure, glossy projections, all upside, no downside. He leaned close and said, "You're the finance guy. Back me up." Old me might have skimmed the numbers, found flaws, then softened the blow. Post Adrian me, I asked the one question that matters. Where's the fence? He blinked. What fence? I pushed the paper back. If you can't tell me what keeps it from blowing up, I'm not in, and you shouldn't be either. It got tense. My sister cut in, changed the subject, saved the night. Later, she texted me, "Thanks." He needed to hear that. Walking home, I realized the shift. Betrayal hadn't just made me cautious. It had made me direct. No spin, no soft edges. Truth without the theater. It cost me a little warmth sometimes, but it bought clarity. And clarity, I'd learned, is rarer than yield. At the firm, quarters blurred into each other. We stayed steady through market noise. Analysts rotated. Culture held. Every new hire got the same initiation. Adrian's deck, the "don't be cute" mantra, and my dry reminder that fences save futures. Some rolled their eyes, but nobody forgot it. Clara's tone shifted too. She no longer grilled every variance. She started asking broader questions. Succession planning, tax strategy, even ESG. It wasn't trust handed over blindly. It was trust balanced with curiosity. That's the sweet spot. One afternoon after a review, she pulled me aside. "You know, David, I think you're harder on yourself than we ever were." I laughed. "That's my risk control." She shook her head. "Don't confuse vigilance with guilt. You're allowed to live, not just monitor." Her words stuck. That weekend, I booked a trip. First real vacation in years. No laptop, just a paperback and bad cell service. Sitting on a beach, listening to waves instead of price ticks, I thought, maybe fences aren't just for work. Maybe they're for carving out spaces where you get to breathe. Back in the city, I found an email from Adrian. Not the usual link or one-liner, a full letter. He wrote about teaching ethics workshops, about working with students who thought finance was just numbers. "I tell them it's people first, numbers second," he said. I wish I'd learned that earlier. Maybe I did, but I ignored it. I read it twice, then 3 times. For the first time, I felt no anger, no ache, just recognition. He'd become something different, maybe even better. I didn't reply, not because I couldn't, but because the silence itself felt like closure. His story was running on its own track now, and mine was running on mine. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is not tether them again. That night I slept heavier than I had in months. By winter, the partners called me into a glass-walled room with the skyline glowing behind them. They offered me a promotion, director, full book oversight, more staff, bigger clients. It was the kind of role people grind years for. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt cornered. More power meant more fences to patrol, more eyes watching me, more weight if anything cracked. After what happened with Adrian, I knew how fast trust could evaporate. Did I really want the seat that carried everyone's fear on its back? That night, I walked the river, icy wind cutting through my coat. I remembered Clara's words, "Don't confuse vigilance with guilt." Maybe I'd been carrying guilt that wasn't mine, wearing it like armor. Maybe it was time to set it down. Next morning I accepted, not out of ambition, out of clarity. If I didn't shape the culture, someone else would, and they might forget the scars. Scars are memory, and memory keeps systems honest. When the news hit, a junior analyst whispered, "Congrats, boss." I smiled, but inside I thought, I'm not a boss, I'm a fence builder, and fences don't brag. They just stand. The new role changed the view. Instead of watching single trades, I watched habits ripple across desks. A bad shortcut in one corner could echo across 10 portfolios if unchecked. I became part portfolio manager, part anthropologist. I started a ritual. Every Monday morning, I'd send a short note to the team. 3 lines, max. One was a market fact, one was a caution, one was cultural. Example: bond spreads widened last week. Don't chase noise. Remember, boring scales. At first, people skimmed. After a few months, I'd hear them quoting the lines back to me in meetings. That's when I knew it stuck. Clara noticed too. She called after a quarterly and said, "Feels like your firm grew up." I told her, "We just stopped pretending shortcuts were clever." She laughed. That's growing up. At home, I caught myself feeling lighter. Less scanning, less suspicion. I still noticed patterns. I'd never unlearned that, but the weight wasn't crushing anymore. Vigilance had turned from a burden into a reflex. Quiet, automatic, useful. One night, while locking up, I paused by the empty desk that had been Adrian's. It was just a chair now, nothing more, but memory still hummed in that space. I thought about all the hours we'd spent side by side, the playlists, the late-night jokes, the trust that once felt solid as stone. And I realized something. Betrayal doesn't erase friendship. It just reframes it. Both exist in the same ledger, side by side. You don't get to pick one column and forget the other. You just carry both, balance them, and move forward. I left the office and stepped into the night air. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't haunted. The story wasn't about Adrian anymore. It was about what came after. The call came just after midnight. A European client, one of the largest we'd ever handled, was panicking. A derivative position tied to energy futures had swung hard, and whispers were spreading that we'd mismanaged exposure. I sat up in bed, heart thudding. Deja vu all over again. Another rumor, another test. By sunrise, I was in the office, tie crooked, coffee untouched. The data told the truth. Exposure was within mandate, hedges intact. But the rumor ran faster than any chart. I remembered March, remembered Clara's voice asking if I'd strayed. This time, I refused to play defense. We called the client into a secure video session. I shared my screen, no spin, no slides, just raw numbers and plain English notes. "Here's the fence," I said. "Here's where we stayed inside it." I even highlighted the audit trail, the dual approvals, the one-line explanations from analysts. Boring evidence, but boring was exactly what they needed. By the end of the call, the panic had cooled. Their CFO exhaled and said, "That's surprisingly dull." I smiled. Exactly. When I hung up, I leaned back in my chair. For the first time, a rumor had died in real time instead of festering. The fences worked. Clara heard about the episode through the grapevine. She called me the next day, tone lighter than usual. "I hear you killed a rumor in under 24 hours, she said. I chuckled. First time for everything. She paused, then added, "That's growth. Yours and theirs." Inside the firm, analysts buzzed. One whispered, "That could have been another Adrian moment." He didn't mean it cruelly, just honestly. And he was right. The difference was the system. We'd built fences that could take a hit. I gathered the team for a debrief. What saved us wasn't luck, I said. It was the boring stuff. Logs, approvals, plain notes. You'll want to get clever one day, to shave corners. Don't. Because clever only works until the rumor mill spins, and then you're done. They listened. I knew because later, in a completely different meeting, one analyst repeated my line almost word for word. Culture doesn't spread in speeches, it spreads in echoes. That night, walking home under a cold drizzle, I thought about Adrian again, how one set of forged notes nearly wrecked me, and how his downfall had built the fences that just saved us. Paradoxical, but true. Months later, at a finance conference, I spotted Adrian on stage. Panel on ethics, tie slightly crooked, voice steady. He spoke about the temptation of invisible mistakes, and how the smallest shortcuts rewrite entire careers. No names, no confessions, just sharp warnings. I stood at the back, arms folded. He didn't see me, didn't need to. The message landed anyway. People around me scribbled notes like he was dropping secrets. I smiled, because I knew he wasn't telling secrets. He was telling scars. Afterward, I slipped out without saying hello. Closure doesn't always need contact. Sometimes it's enough to know the story kept moving in a direction that mattered. On the flight home, I stared out the window at the cloud tops and thought, maybe betrayal doesn't end a story. Maybe it rewrites the middle, and the ending's still yours to draft. By the next spring, I wasn't just managing trades or smoothing client calls. I was shaping people. New hires came in already quoting the phrases we'd coined. Don't be cute. Boring scales. Fences save futures. They didn't even know the backstory in detail. For them, it was just culture, like office oxygen. I started mentoring a group of 5 juniors. Instead of hammering math drills, I asked them questions. If this trade fails, what story does the log tell? At first, they looked confused, expecting equations, not philosophy. But over time, I watched their notes sharpen, their reasoning grow clearer. Numbers mattered, but narrative mattered more. A clean audit trail is a story that defends itself. One kid, Sarah, came to me with a routing idea that technically broke no rule but smelled of cleverness. It'd save basis points, she said, nervous. I asked her, would you be proud explaining it to a client's grandkids? She blinked, then shook her head. Didn't think so, I said. That moment stuck. Weeks later, she repeated the same line to another analyst. Echoes again. That's when I realized I wasn't just fixing culture, I was planting it. Clara noticed the shift too. During a review, she said, your team feels different, less defensive, more accountable. You building that? I shrugged. Trying. Culture's like compounding interest. You don't notice it daily, but years later, you're rich or broke. She smiled. Good answer. After the meeting, one of her cousins pulled me aside. You ever worry you're too rigid? That fences keep out growth as well as risk? It was a fair question. I thought for a beat. Fences don't block growth. They channel it. Otherwise everything spills. He nodded slowly, like he wasn't convinced but respected the logic. That night, back at my desk, I reread Adrian's old letter. His words about ignoring lessons until it was too late rang louder now. He'd failed, yes, but he'd also handed me the blueprint for what not to do, and from that blueprint, I'd built something sturdier than either of us expected. Funny thing, sometimes the worst teacher gives the best lesson. The firm asked me to keynote our annual retreat. Me, the guy who once almost got buried by forged notes. I stood in front of 100 colleagues, the projector humming, and said the simplest thing I could. Culture isn't a slogan. It's the tiny choices you make when nobody's watching. I told them about logs, approvals, fences, yes, the boring stuff. But I also told them about scars, about how betrayal carves lessons into you deeper than any handbook. I never named Adrian. Didn't need to. The silence in the room said everyone knew. When I finished, the applause felt strange, not triumphant, not loud, steady, measured. The kind of clapping that says, we get it, and we'll carry it. Afterward, a junior came up and said, I thought this job was about chasing alpha. You made it sound like it's about chasing honesty. I smiled. Those two aren't opposites, one just lasts longer. Years rolled faster once the culture held. The firm grew, clients stayed, juniors matured. My name got tied to stability, which isn't flashy but buys trust. I didn't chase headlines anymore, I chased consistency. One evening, walking out of the office, I paused by the window and saw my reflection against the city lights. For the first time, I didn't see the guy who almost lost everything. I saw the guy who'd rebuilt something sturdier. Clara called a week later, not for numbers but for advice. We're grooming the next generation of Whitmores, she said. What should they learn first? I didn't hesitate. That trust is earned in boring increments and lost in one clever move. She laughed softly. You always come back to boring. Because boring works, I said. Later that night, I finally replied to Adrian's last email. Just one line. I hope the students you're teaching build stronger fences than we ever had. I didn't expect a response. He didn't send one. That felt right. Some conversations end better in silence. The final lesson came quietly. An analyst I'd mentored stopped me in the hall. I just caught myself about to cut a corner, she said. Then I heard your voice in my head. Don't be cute. So I didn't. She grinned. Boring saved me. I laughed, but inside, it hit deeper. Culture had outgrown me. It no longer needed my scars or Adrian's deck. It had become reflex, muscle memory, the kind of thing that sticks long after names fade. That night I walked the river path, the city buzzing behind me, the water black and steady. I thought about everything, the betrayal, the rumors, the meetings, the fences, and I realized the ending wasn't revenge or redemption. The ending was survival, transformation, continuity. Betrayal didn't define me, what I built after did. And for once, the floor beneath me felt solid.